Hi, my name's Dr. Catherine Hughes. I run a business called Crime Psych, and that enables me to bring knowledge and learning to everyone, not just those who are studying at colleges or university. And I do this by producing a range of blogs, vlogs and free online courses such as this one, but I do also run slightly more in-depth courses which are both available online and face-to-face. So once you finish this video, why not head on over to my website? The details are in the video description below, and see if any of those courses or blogs or vlogs would be of further interest to you. In this video, I'm going to be talking about attachment theory, what it is and how we become attached in various ways. A large part of the research that I do when I gather information to do with psychological analysis on offender is to look at their upbringing. There's usually always clues that indicate the sort of person that they'll go on to become. More often than not, there are traumatic events or poor parenting or even abuse in their early childhood or during their lives. Therefore, I decided to dedicate a whole video to examining a major aspect of criminal psychology research, and that's attachment theory. The more I looked for material to include in this video, the wider the search became. It was no easy task to decide which studies and which areas to include in just a short video. Therefore, I decided that it was probably best to do 3 short videos rather than one really long one. The first and second video will examine attachment theory by John Bowlby and social control theory by Hershey. We'll examine how they categorise and define attachment styles, as well as looking at how dysfunction in parenting can lead to aggressive or even delinquent behaviour later in life. We know that the majority of crimes are committed by males rather than females. However, there is some debate as to why this might be. Several researchers have argued that the attachment style and length are different between females and males. Others argue that boys are just socialised differently, and that's why they commit more crime. Therefore, in the final video in this series, we'll explore the various proposals for differences between males and females. As I mentioned, the 2 main theories that address attachments to caregivers in relation to offending are attachment theory and social control theory. Attachment theory was proposed by Bowlby in the 1950s and 60s, and he examines the links that exist between attachment and delinquency. Bowlby examined and explored the ways that infants became distressed when they're separated from their primary caregiver. He noticed how some of the young children would become upset and cry and cling to their mothers when they were being separated from one another. These attachment behaviours are natural, and infants are born with an innate need to stay close to their primary caregivers. Throughout a series of experiments, Bowlby noted that if a parent-child attachment relationship is disrupted significantly during childhood, it led to long-term difficulties such as aggression or delinquent behaviour by the child. He found that these children were unable to show affection or concern for other people. Bowlby was the first psychologist to investigate attachments between infants and parents or primary caregivers. Bowlby built upon the work of psychologists called Lorenz and Harlow, who in 1965 and 1958 established that animals seek attachment even with the absence of food. The findings suggested that attachment is primary rather than a secondary need, meaning that it's a biological need rather than a psychological one. In 1988, Bowlby believed that from infancy, children internalised and organised patterns of relating to other people. Infants can mentally represent their experiences with attachment figures and construct ideas and expectations about relationships with primary as well as secondary attachment figures. As such, an internal working model of attachment is gradually shaped during the child's development. Bowlby concluded that early attachment between babies and caregivers is necessary for normal development to occur. Attachment theory is a theory of both normal and abnormal development that focuses on the impact of the parent-child attachment relationships on healthy development and psychological development. A researcher named Ainsworth worked closely with Bowlby to investigate attachment. They set up a series of experiments involving mothers and their children. An experiment was set up where the mothers would place the child amongst some toys and sit in the opposite corner of the room from the child, and a stranger is also present in the room. The mother then leaves the room and the child's behaviour is then monitored. As a result of these experiments, it was found that children could be categorised according to the type of attachment that they displayed. The majority of the children were securely attached to their mothers. Some were upset when their mothers left, and others were not bothered, they just continued playing. On the mother's return, the securely attached children either sought interaction or simply acknowledged her presence when she returned back into that room. They did find that around 20% of children were classified as insecurely attached and avoidant. These children avoided all interaction or showed very little interest in the mother once she returned back to the room. Insecurely attached children showed little signs of being distressed when their mothers left. If they did become upset, they were easily comforted by the stranger who was still left in the room. Around 10% of the children were classified as insecurely attached and ambivalent. These children showed resistance to their mother when she returned. They simultaneously seek and resist physical contact with their mothers. Some of these children cried to be picked up, but then squirmed to be let down again. Others were very passive by crying for their mothers, but not making any attempt to move towards her when she returned to the room, and resisting her when she did approach them. A small percentage of children are classified as disorganised. These children often show mixed attachment behaviours. A high percentage of children whose parents have a psychiatric condition or have been maltreated are classified as disorganised. The temperament and personality of the children can also have an impact on how securely attached they become to their caregivers. Research has found that attachment styles are likely to remain stable over time unless there are drastic changes in their family circumstances. The pattern of early attachment is related to how well these children cope with new experiences during their first few years of their lives. One experiment gave toddlers a variety of puzzles to solve. Some were easy, others were very difficult. Children who'd been identified as being securely attached tackled the puzzle with enthusiasm, and they showed persistence in trying to solve it. When they were unable to solve the puzzle, they sought help from the adult who was present. In contrast, though, the children who'd been classified as insecurely attached became easily frustrated and became angry when they couldn't complete the task. These children rarely asked for help from the adults, and they gave up trying fairly quickly. Further studies have found differences in the way that children behaved in nursery schools. Children who were identified as being securely attached tended to be social leaders. They lead and participate in social activities, and they're eager to learn. In contrast, insecurely attached children tended to be very socially withdrawn and very hesitant about joining in. These children tended to be less curious about things and less forceful in the pursuit of any goals that they were presented with. The differences between those who were securely or insecurely attached continues throughout life. Those with secure attachments are better able to cope with new experiences and are much more confident. Attachment styles have been investigated in adults by researchers called Bartholomew and Horowitz in 1991. Adults are described as having 4 attachment styles: secure, anxious preoccupied, dismissive avoidant, or fearful avoidant. The secure attachment style in adult corresponds to the secure attachment style in children. The anxious preoccupied attachment styles in adults corresponds to the anxious ambivalent attachment in children. However, the dismissive avoidant attachment style and the fearful avoidant attachment styles, which are distinct in adults, correspond to a single avoidant attachment style within children. A secure attachment style is demonstrated by those possessing a positive view of themselves and a positive view of others. Securely attached people tend to find it easy to become emotionally close to others and are comfortable both dependent on people and having people depend on them. This type of attachment style usually results from a history of warm and responsive interactions with their attachment figures. Securely attached people tend to have positive views of themselves and their attachments. They also tend to have a positive view on their relationships. They report greater satisfaction and adjustments in their relationships than people with other attachment styles did. Securely attached people feel comfortable both with intimacy and with independence. An anxious preoccupied attachment style is demonstrated by those who have a negative view of themselves and a positive view of others. People with anxious preoccupied attachment types tend to want to be completely emotionally intimate with other people, but they often find that they're reluctant to get as close as they would like. They're uncomfortable being without close relationships, but they worry that others don't value them as much as they value others. People with this style of attachment seek high levels of intimacy, approval, and responsiveness from their attachment figure or from a person that they're in a relationship with. They'll sometimes value intimacy to such an extent that they'll become overly dependent on the attachment figure. Compared with securely attached people, people who are anxious or preoccupied tend to have less positive views about themselves. They may feel a sense of anxiousness that only recedes when they're in contact with their attachment figure, which could be in a relationship or friendship. They often doubt their worth as a person and blame themselves for the attachment figure's lack of responsiveness. People who are anxious or preoccupied with attachment may exhibit high levels of emotional responsiveness, emotional dysregulation, worry, and impulsiveness in their relationships. A dismissive avoidant attachment style is demonstrated by those who possess a positive view of themselves and a negative view of others. People with a dismissive style or avoidant attachment tend to be comfortable without close emotional relationships. It's important for them to feel independent and to be self-sufficient, and they prefer to not depend on other people, and they don't want other people to depend on them. People with this attachment style want a high level of independence. The desire for independence often appears as an attempt to avoid attachment altogether. They view themselves as being self-sufficient and invulnerable to feelings associated with being closely attached to others. They often deny needing close relationships. Some might even view close relationships as relatively unimportant in their lives. Not surprisingly, then, they seek less intimacy with attachments whom they often view less positively than they view themselves. Investigators commonly note the defensive character of this attachment style. People with a dismissive avoidant attachment style tend to suppress or hide their feelings, and they tend to deal with rejection by distancing themselves from the source of that rejection. So, for example, they'll distance themselves from their attachment figures or from their close relationships, be that intimate or friendships. Fearful, unresolved, or cannot classify attachment styles are demonstrated by those possessing an unstable or a fluctuating view of themselves and of other people. People with losses or trauma, such as sexual abuse in childhood and adolescence, may often develop this type of attachment and tend to be somewhat uncomfortable getting close to other people. They often want emotionally close relationships, but they find it difficult to completely trust others or to even depend on them. They may worry that they'll be hurt if they allow themselves to become close to other people in relationships, if they attach themselves to other people. They tend to feel uncomfortable with emotional closeness, and the mixed feelings are combined with sometimes unconscious negative views about themselves and their attachments. They commonly view themselves as being unworthy of responsiveness from their attachment figures, and they don't trust the intentions of their attachment figures. Similar to the dismissive avoidant attachment style, people with a fearful avoidant attachment style seek less intimacy from attachments, and they'll frequently suppress or deny their own feelings. Because of this, they're much less comfortable expressing affection with other people. Of course, the way that the parents behave can have a big impact on how the child develops attachments and builds relationships with other people. The behaviour and parenting style of the adults can either be authoritarian or authoritative. Authoritarian parents are very controlling towards their children. They think that the child should obey their orders without questioning, and they'll use actual punishments or a threat of punishments to get them to do what the parent wants them to do. Authoritarian parents are rigid with their expectations, and they show high levels of control even when the child has matured or grown up. Compared with the authoritarian parents, authoritative parents are likely to be warm, nurturing, and responsive. Because authoritative parents are responsive to their children's emotional needs, children from authoritative families have good emotional control. They develop resilience and can recuperate quickly from any setbacks that they have. Compared to authoritative parents, authoritarian parents are the exact opposite in terms of warmth and responsiveness. Authoritarian parents are cold and non-responsive. They view the children's sensitive emotions as being weak, and they suppress it. Authoritative parents allow their child to seek autonomy and dependence. Instead of tight control, they closely monitor their children's behaviour and correct them only when they need it. Studies have shown that parental monitoring substantially reduces a child's risk in antisocial behaviour, delinquency and drug abuse. Parental monitoring is most likely to be effective and healthy when it's in a warm and supportive relationship. Authoritative parents who involve their children in making decisions for the family. Communication between parents and child is encouraged within those families. On the other hand, authoritarian parents discourage independence. They don't involve their children in any decision making. Children are given orders instead of being requested to do things by their parents. Both authoritative and authoritarian parents are strict, and they have high expectation of their children. Authoritative parents are strict and warm, whilst authoritarian parents are cold and strict. Authoritative parents discuss and explain the rules with their child. They're open to give and take discussions, and they'll modify the rules if and when it's appropriate. Children are taught to think critically about the reasons behind each of the rules that they set. Because children with authoritative parents can speak their mind and can participate in decision making, they're more assertive and have high levels of self-esteem as they grow up. Authoritarian parents only allow one-way communication. They use "because I said so" as a reason behind their rules. Children are expected to blindly obey them without question. The children are not allowed to have a voice or voice their opinions. Children are often seen but not heard. Children whose parents have authoritarian parenting styles can be insecure and apprehensive. Both authoritative and authoritarian parents hold very high standards and control over their children's behaviour. Authoritarian parents also impose tight psychological control over their children. They believe that they, the parents, are the authorities who are always right. Their children need to accept their judgments and values at all times. Authoritarian parents can sometimes worry about under-controlling their children. Therefore, they want to do the opposite, but they use other extreme methods, such as over-controlling their children. Authoritarian parents rely on a child's sense of fear towards their parents to exert psychological control over them. Children whose parents use psychological control as a means of discipline are more likely to be submissive, apprehensive, and dependent. Some children fight to be free of such control, resulting in externalizing behavior problems such as acting out. Authoritative parents tend to use non-punitive measures such as time-out and natural consequences to discipline. Authoritarian parents favour stricter punishments. Increasingly, though, although authoritative parents allow their children to have more freedom and autonomy, their standards are usually higher than that of the authoritarian parents. They also follow through on the consequences much more consistently. Authoritative parenting results in better outcomes in children overall. The only expectation is that some inconsistencies in school performances are found in other ethnic groups such as the African American or the Asian Americans. Having high standards and enforcing limits consistently may be the reasons why children with authoritative parents achieve higher academic results. Another factor for high academic performance is high parental involvement in authoritative parenting. Authoritative parents tend to monitor children's homework and volunteer at their schools. Research has found that involvement by parents is directly linked to better school performance. But authoritarian parents also have high standards and they enforce limits. Some are also very involved in the child's schooling. This could potentially explain why, in some cultures, such as Chinese cultures, authoritarian parenting is associated with better grades. However, authoritarian parents hold tight psychological control and favour punitive punishments for their children when they're disciplining them. Despite the academic success, kids with authoritarian parents are more depressed and have more mental health issues as they grow up.